So while we're waiting for people to come in, I see 5 people on the stream on YouTube. I think that's where people are being routed. Let's go ahead and just jump in. So first and foremost, again, I appreciate you tuning into this live prototype of a thing, of a webinar, of some information around how to introduce facilitation techniques into meetings and hopefully making meetings better. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Skipper Chong Warson. Let's fade out that music because I wanted it as part of the introduction. But as much as I love Miles Davis, John Coltrane also played on this particular session, as well as the three albums came from this session. But anyway, John Coltrane, Miles Davis, amazing song. But let's jump into the meat of the presentation. So again, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Skipper Chong Warson. I'm a product strategist, designer, and workshop facilitator, among other things that I do. And my main area of focus is to strengthen multifunctional teams, make sure that they're clear through a variety of activities, some of which is hands-on keyboard design work. Some of it's around talking to customers, making sure that there's a clear line between what customers need, want, and their pain points, focusing on outcomes, those sorts of things. I also do some coaching as well. And I do all of this through How This Works Co. So that's my commercial for this webinar. There'll be some contact information at the end. But I want to get started with a couple of questions so I can understand who's here better. When I was looking at the folks who've RSVP'd, I saw a lot of familiar faces, a lot of familiar names. But I wonder, have you been in a meeting and maybe you're halfway through it and you've wondered, what am I doing here? If you have, just post in the chat, been there. I know there's a bit of a delay. I clocked it a couple days ago and it seemed about 20 seconds. So I'll pause and I'll reframe the question. Maybe you've seen a meeting that's coming up on your calendar, and when you looked at it, you thought, oh, you just had this involuntary sigh of despair. So basically, I'm asking about if you've had a response to a bad meeting. Just post, been there. And just to get one more sense, I know that a number of people here are either workshop facilitators, or you've participated in a workshop or some kind of facilitated exercise. If this is true for you, just post the phrase, done that. As I said, I know a number of you are either in the design space or the product space, and have either actively facilitated or you've done adjacent work. I just want to get a feeling of who's here and kind of what people do. So my intention for this webinar today, the content that I have should actually be fairly short, maybe about 30, 40 minutes worth of content. But my intention is to start with a few bits of information. And then I want to share 5 tips on how to shift a bad meeting to something that's more focused and about intentional decision making. So as I'm going through this, I would like you to drop questions and comments in the chat. In future iterations, remember this is number 1, you all are here for the first episode, the first version of this. I would like this to be more interactive, where I can present something, or maybe other people will come in and present as well, but that can be a spur for others to talk, and then we can spin off discussions from there. I want to have this back and forth because I don't believe in these echo chambers that have been set up for a lot of different reasons. I've got the YouTube on the side so I can see comments coming in, but I'll try not to be distracted about that until we get to the end bit where I can kind of scroll back through. Yeah, it just looks like nothing comes up on LinkedIn. So I appreciate you all jumping over to YouTube because it looks like that's where a lot of you are. So let's get into the problem with bad meetings. And I don't mean to single out the person who's standing in this photo that I got off of Unsplash, but I wanted to show an image of a typical meeting where one person's at the front and everyone else in that meeting is just not very active. And while this photo and a reframing of it on the next slide may not get exactly at the idea, I think you get the point. So with bad meetings, there are a number of problems, and here are just some common ones. First, there's unequal participation. Typically, folks earlier in their career and those who are quieter and maybe even introverted people, they just don't say much. The loudest person in the room just dominates. So they say all the things, they say it in really big ways, and it seems like their ideas just kind of carry the meeting. And then some other things that happen as a result of some of those practices is that a few, if any, actionable outcomes are produced because of this uneven participation. Alignment is murky at best. Are people really clear on what they're working on? And then as a result, next steps are unclear. So then you get that feeling, having been in that meeting, what was the point? What was I even doing there? So I think that a lot of us have sat in situations like this. And then there's the usual advice that you hear about how to make meetings better, start and end on time, make a better agenda, make it something more focused, take notes, take action, follow up, hold others accountable, and ultimately ask the question, could this meeting have been an email? Could it have been a message of some sort, maybe a Slack message, Teams message, whatever the medium that your group or organization uses? Could it have been anything else? And spoiler alert, like the t-shirt says on the side, the answer is most often yes, right? This meeting could have been an email. Yes. But that's a little bit beside the point. I want to talk here now about some of the cognitive side of why this meeting drone is not beneficial to the most participants. And there's a lot of information on this slide. I'm aware of it. In fact, the first point with Nelson Cowan and George Miller's work could be its own topic in and of itself. But briefly, in 1956, George Miller discovered, he wrote a paper, it was called The Magical Number 7, plus or minus 2. So Miller found that the human brain can hold 5 to 9 pieces of information at once, which, since that paper came out almost 70 years ago now, that some people have applied much more broadly than he intended. 5 to 9 doesn't apply to bullet points. It doesn't apply to things like team sizes. It doesn't apply to things like menu design. It really applies to cognitive tasks of absolute judgment and immediate memory span. So then along comes Nelson Cowan, and he determined in the 2000s, he wrote his paper in 2007, that the amount of information is not 7 plus or minus 2, that 5 to 9 number, but it's more like 3 to 4 chunks of information. And the thing that he did in his work is that he took into account things like rehearsal and memorization. So think about when you're trying to memorize a phone number, for instance, 10 numbers, including the area code, and you sit and you repeat certain parts of the number over and over until you've committed it to memory. So that's what Cowan took into account, and the number that he came up with was 3 to 4. So that's just that first point on this slide. But also keep in mind that there's a lot of other things, and I challenge myself to boil this down to one slide, so that way we could keep it really contained. Because as I said, these cognitive matters really deserve a lot more explanation and discussion. But I'm not a scientist. I don't study the brain. There are other kinds of work that I do, but I learn things on the internet and in books and in other places. But just keep in mind that one of the things about cognitive ability is that it goes down throughout the day. And cognitive switching really is a killer around focus and getting things done. There are a lot of numbers that you can see in different parts written up in research as well as different parts of the internet, but 40% seems to be a median number here. So let's just say that. And then the other thing that comes into this is the idea of these biases that are stronger for some, weaker for others. But three that I called out are the recency bias, the primacy bias, and the authority bias. And the recency bias, kind of basically, if you want to boil it down, it's around the idea that we remember best what was discussed last, which in a meeting can really skew priorities and ways in which we can kind of rank stack information. The primacy bias is where we give undue weight to what's been discussed first. So regardless of whether or not it's most important, we think of the thing that we first talked about. And then the authority bias, where we give disproportionate attention to ideas that people in leadership offer. So remember that example around bad meetings where the loudest people get their voices heard. So whether or not their ideas have merit or they don't have merit, these are still the things that people think of when they think of, oh, we have to pay attention to that because that person is in a position of authority. So I know that was a lot of information, and I appreciate you listening and watching and going through this with me. Um, but I want to switch gears and I want to do a quick exercise. And just to preface this, on a webinar with a streaming delay, this is going to be tricky, but bear with me. So first of all, I want you to get something to write on and something to write with. You can keep that off to the side. It can be Sharpie with a sticky note. It can be pen and paper. It can just be maybe a word processing program on your computer too. That's fine. But I want you to keep that off to the side. Don't do anything with it yet. Okay? Ready? On this screen, you're going to see a number of words. Maybe there's a theme, maybe they're random. It doesn't really matter what they are. And I'm going to keep them up for about 10 seconds. So look at them. And I want you to see how many you can remember at the end of this. And I'm going to talk over it to mimic a meeting. So these words may have come from a dictionary, maybe a puzzle from the New York Times. I'm not really sure. I don't remember where they all came from. And as a designer, I had quite a time with spacing between the words and getting it perfectly, vertically and horizontally. In fact, I'm still not, I don't really know that it's right. I don't know that it's going to win any design competitions, but this is the slide. 3, 2, 1. So now I want you to grab your pen and paper, or maybe the document you opened on your computer, or the sticky note, and I want you, whatever you got to make notes, and I want you to write down as many words as you can remember. Now there's a bit of a delay in the stream, so I'll pause here so you can do that and actually take a drink of water. Okay. All right, so here's that list again. How did you do? And just post that number in the chat if you'd like. And I'm going to say a little bit about the number, and I'm going to spoil it and say the number doesn't really mean anything. But if you got 3 to 4, are you Team Cowan? Are you somewhere in the 5 to 9 area? Are you more Team Miller? More than 9? I mean, that sounds like Team Perfect Memory or Instant Recall or something like that. So the thing that I want to call out is that, as I said, the number doesn't really matter. How many you remembered isn't important. Mileage will vary. If we do this exercise again, it's going to show up in different ways. It might just mean that you were distracted. I also didn't preview in the exercise that you were going to do any kind of that you're going to do any kind of exercise like this. But the same thing applies to meetings. So many of the key points will be lost, even in a short meeting, in a 15-minute meeting, never mind an hour meeting. This goes for you, this goes for other participants, and maybe even the person running the meeting. But the main thing that suffers when so much information is just thrown out there is that there isn't an actionable focus when you don't take into account cognitive limits along with other meeting paradigms and company culture and expectations and things on that level. So for some of you, this is what you came to this webinar for, is that you wanted the tips on how to improve your meetings. And I want to say something before I get started on these 5 techniques that you can use to improve and level up your meetings. There's a mixture of things here, some of which will require pre-work and some of which can also be done on the spot. I also imagine that you don't run every single meeting that you attend. So there's space and room for pairing with others or working with others on the best paths forward in terms of how your group or your company runs meetings. And it also might require a bit of improvisation, experiments, much like this webinar. So build in some time and space and expectation around that as well. So the first one, plan it out. This is one of the suggestions that will most likely require some pre-work. It would be much harder to do in the room, but ask yourself, what mode is this meeting? Is it a lecture? Could it be something different? Could it be a small group discussion? Is it a scenario challenge to test an approach? And then once you understand what the mode is, would it be helpful to change it during the meeting? Like starting in a lecture format, that one-to-many communication of information, but then maybe there's a moment where people can work alone together and then compile these into ideas and prioritize them. And I say these things as examples and possibilities, but not necessarily as a predetermined path. Brainstorming, which is something that often comes up during meetings. Oh, we'll do some brainstorming. But brainstorming the way that it's typically done, where there's a prompt and people shout things out like it's some kind of auction, it kind of ends up being more like a group think train wreck, is the way that I think of it. And it features the loudest voices and the biggest ideas. Do you remember that idea of there's unequal participation? Well, that happens in these sort of verbal brainstorming moments. So, as much as possible, it can be quite beneficial to a meeting and to the participants, and subsequently the outcomes, to break things up, figure out how to move things around, do things a little bit differently. So, number 2, we started big and wide with the first one, but let's get more clear and specific. Establish a clear goal. Is it obvious what this meeting is even about? What's the intended outcome? If I don't know what that goal of a meeting is, I often just play dumb and ask. But that's something about my personality, and I feel like I can do that. Not everyone can. But even if I am clear about a meeting, by stating the goal back as I understand it amongst a group, I'm creating a shared understanding. And more than that, I distribute the responsibility for the outcome. And then by doing all of those things, I'm also establishing a reference point for keeping the meeting on track. And it might be helpful to write this down in an obvious place where everyone can see it. Might be something like when you walk into a school dance, how there used to be a theme and there would be some sort of announcement. Maybe it's that idea where, or when you're doing a product design sprint and you have the sprint goal or the sprint question, depending on how you frame it. That's something that everyone understands. It's an overarching premise that is clear and concise so that everyone who looks at it can not only understand it, but then can also take the responsibility for making sure that things stay on track. So the third tip that I came up with was this idea of documenting everything. And this is definitely more in the workshop-y sort of realm of things. And it's also going to depend on a little bit of your company's culture. If this is not something that your group or your company has done already, this might be one of those things that can be initiated by leading with example. So, and I want to caution, I want to throw in a note of caution that the idea of having one person write everything down, function like a secretary, can also create their own kind of bottleneck. So, what I find to be most helpful is this notion of, and no one wants to watch you while you type or watch someone while they type, but this idea of writing something down before you speak, that is something that I found to be much more constructive. Because not only does this give people time to refine their thinking, it creates a record of each contribution. And it also helps with those quieter people or less engaged people to be able to contribute. And this can be done digitally and physically as well. And it's also just a great habit to um, get people into this mode of thinking, writing down, and making sure that things are documented in a um, cooperative way. So the fourth suggestion is making a parking lot. For anyone who's done a workshop, I think that most facilitators will understand this concept. And a parking lot, for those of you who aren't acquainted with this, but it's just an area that is off to the side. It's visible. It's clearly designated, but it's for off-topic items that are important, but not immediately relevant to that goal or that theme at hand. And this way that ideas and items can be captured and kept over in that area. And this preserves those tangents or off topics, the sidebars, while keeping the meeting focused. And you can have the person with the parking lot item encapsulate the previous tip, which is write it down. Like, that's a great sidebar, but we don't have time to address that right now. I don't want to forget it. Write it down, put it in the parking lot. Now, that in and of itself is a powerful tip, but the stretch part of it that makes it even more actionable and powerful is where you and you have to do this, because if you don't, it doesn't matter how many good things you put in the parking lot. The most important part of this tip is to save 5 minutes at the end specifically to review what's in there. Because without this, a parking lot just becomes a good place where, or a place, not a good place, but a place where good ideas go to die. So you never want people to go through the effort of writing something down, putting in the parking lot, and then feeling like it's been summarily ignored. So the last tip, this is 5 of 5, end with next steps. And do this before anyone leaves the room. Doing this activity transforms all of that discussion and all of that work into the very next action. Personally, I like the what, who, when framework, which you see an example of on the screen. And it's just a really simple 3-column table. You can do it with sticky notes. This was created in Miro digitally, but you can do this live. And the 3 columns all stand for a very specific thing. So what is around what needs to be done, and that should be specific, measurable actions, not just vague intentions or something that we're going to do someday. Who is a single responsible owner? And here I say single because you want to avoid group ownership. It's not about the team, it's about who is the one person who's responsible. Be very, very granular. And then when refers to a clear deadline. And again, this is about being specific. You can include a date, you can include a date and time, whatever it is that helps to hold people accountable and understand what is expected from different people to execute, to implement some of those ideas that have come up in the meeting. The other part to this is to have people verbally confirm their commitments and then send a follow-up. So all of this is around this idea that how do we make sure that all the work that's been done is not for naught. So double negative in there, but I think you get what I'm saying. So that was the 5 tips. There are many more. I had a list of about 27, and then it came down to a list of 11. So that's just a taste of what could be done in order to make meetings more actionable, to make those bad meetings less bad, or even better, make them good meetings. And I want to point out a couple things here. Change is rarely instant. Your group might have a lot of meeting debt. They might have some ways in which they think back-to-back meetings are really good, like productivity. That sort of gauge of productivity is some sort of badge of honor to have a packed calendar. So there's a lot of feelings and emotional weight around this idea of I'm running from meeting to meeting. I'm very busy. So what I would say here is just try the smallest thing. You know your team, you know the people that you work with. Maybe it's one of the 5 tips, maybe it's something else. But ultimately, try a little something, get feedback, enlist other people, and remember, even small shifts can significantly improve meeting outcomes. So, so as this is my very first session, um, boy, I have learned a lot about live streams and other pieces of technology. Like doing a webinar is very different than doing a video meeting, and there are lots of different capabilities. Questions and comments are limited to it looks like the chat specifically on YouTube. Um, so if you've posted something, uh, happy to talk about it. Um, in future versions, as I said, this paradigm might be nice to have a co-host to be able to talk to someone. This idea of talking straight to the camera and listening to myself is not something that I'm absolutely enjoying, and I don't know that I want to continue in this mode. But it also would be nice in future versions to have people come off mute and just ask questions. But the thing is that I know that for myself, I needed to start somewhere. So this is where I'm starting. Um, so what I would say is for the folks that are watching on YouTube, if there are some questions that you want to ask, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We can talk through them while y- people are generating some thoughts and ideas. I wanted to do something that I do in a lot of the work that I put out, whether it's on LinkedIn or on Medium or wherever it is that I'm citing it. I do the same thing on the How This Works show, the podcast. Um, but I also wanted to cite the works, and so some of them came from books. I used some things from Sprint by Jake Knapp and John Zeratsky, also Rob Fitzpatrick's The Workshop Survival Guide, especially that idea of meeting modes, right? Is it a lecture, small group discussions, things like that. um, I initially learned about the what, who, when from Dave Gray's Game Storming. And then, as you might imagine, um, from the density and the information around George Miller and uh, Nelson Cowan, lots of internet searching. Also, did use Perplexity and Claude a little bit in that subject matter. Did some basic grammar checks through Claude, and then most of the photos came from Unsplash. So I'll leave it on this slide. I see Lindsay has a question that she's popped into the chat around, do I have a tip about what kind of details to include in a meeting invite? Um, I mean, I think one of the things, if there is an activity that you're thinking about for a meeting, just postulate that as you don't necessarily want to surprise people and say that and spring it on them, much like I did with the information overload exercise. But you also there's going to be a moment you're not going to go from 50% of your meetings being bad or whatever the ratio is to all of a sudden 50% of them being good, right? That doesn't happen in the snap of a finger. So what I would say is, if you are running the meeting and you can, you can pen the calendar invite to say, we're going to try something out in this meeting. Give someone a bit of a preview. don't catch people off guard. I would say that idea of meeting people where they're at is important. I would also say that if this is not your meeting, but this is one of those meetings that you look at on your calendar and you think, oh, this is just not the thing that I want to go to. Why are we doing this? We did this last week or we did this last month and no one likes it. I would say pull the person aside whose meeting it is, and maybe it's a hierarchy challenge where they might be above you or they might be more um, experienced in the organization. They might be more seasoned. But I think that people generally assume the best is one of my life philosophies. Is that I do think that people are working to do their best work, their best job, like they're trying their best. So I think even pulling someone aside and saying, "Hey, I've noticed that in your meetings, like such and such happens," or call out something that is noticeable, and maybe even hard to refute, because you don't want to make it a value thing. You definitely don't want to say something like your meeting sucks. You should try something else. But I think ask permission or ask if they're interested in facilitating something themselves. There was a workshop that I ran last year with a consumer goods company. And as we were going through the workshop planning process, we ended up running a 2-day workshop with a variety of different activities, ecosystem mapping, um, scaffolding out some personas, thinking about the 10 types of innovation, lots of different activities. But a week before the workshop, I found out that the company actually had someone who's in charge of innovation and someone who it was meant to be doing this work. I don't know why they weren't invited to the initial planning sessions, but I knew that it was important to bring that person along and not just have them sit in a workshop and not be active and participatory. So the first part of the workshop, we actually carved out for them to present back this SWOT analysis that they're working on for the company. And so I feel like when you can bring people along, then that can help you in pursuing your other goals. They really wanted to get to the 10 types of innovation. But in order to do that, I needed to pave the way. So, in addition to having the person in charge of innovation for that company come in and present this SWOT analysis along with several other pieces of information, we also did lightning talks from other people within the group. So, we heard from the CEO, we heard from one of their chief advisors. So, what are ways that you can involve other people in tactical ways that get at the larger goal is the thing that I would say. Um, I put a lot into that answer, and Lindsay, maybe you're looking for something more tactical, but those are some things that come to mind. So I'm going to go ahead and thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate your focus. I'm on LinkedIn, which is how you all found this webinar in the first place, I believe. You can find out more information at the company's website, howthisworks.co. Again, that's howthisworks.co. Please reach out if you have any questions. And as I said before, this is meant to be an ongoing series, that the title right now is Unpacking Process. And this is but the first. So expect another one in about 3 weeks' time. Hopefully, we'll have some of the wrinkles worked out in terms of the streaming and make the next version of this. So thanks so much. Talk more later. Bye.